for spreading misinformation. This is an
Order.
important
Senator
time for
Whish-Wilson.
Australians to
Being
get
2
the
p.m,
facts.
we'll move to questions. Senator Keneally.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Health, Senator Colbeck. Is the Minister aware that today the New South Wales Health Minister Brad Hazzard confirmed the gap between the first and second doses of Pfizer vaccine in Sydney will be spaced out to 8 weeks? Mr Hazzard said, and I quote, "Simply put, there is not enough Pfizer in New South Wales or anywhere in the 2 major states, New South Wales or Victoria, for the people who are now wanting it." Will the Minister acknowledge today's announcement is not enough to fix this?
The Minister representing the Minister for Health and Aged Care, Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. Thanks, Senator Keneally,
Order.
for her question. Mr President, yes, and I did see the media conference where Minister Hazzard indicated that the spacing
Order.
for Pfizer vaccines in New South Wales had been spaced out to 8 weeks. I understand, Mr President, that in Victoria it's actually at a 6-week interval. In other jurisdictions, they have varying
Order.
they have varying intervals between the doses based on the health advice, Mr
Senator
President.
Watt.
And we have continued to put additional capacity where we can into jurisdictions. In fact, only recently we announced that we had available to Australia, through a deal with Poland, 1 million additional Pfizer doses, Mr President, and we put half of those into New South Wales with the acknowledgement of the circumstances that New South Wales was seeing with the current outbreak, Mr President. And today, very pleasingly, an additional 500,000 doses coming from Singapore, Mr President, will also assist with the circumstances nationally with the vaccine rollout. And as the Prime Minister has said, we continue to work on the availability of vaccines to assist the vaccine rollout, Mr President. We've been very transparent with the Australian people. We have published the supply projections for vaccines out to the end of the year. Mr President, that information was provided to the chamber.
Order.
That information was provided out to the chamber some months ago, Mr President, and we continue to be transparent. There are significant supplies right now of AstraZeneca available. There are no constraints with respect to the supply of AstraZeneca, Mr President, so I would encourage anyone who wants a vaccine to make inquiries about getting one.
Senator Keneally, a supplementary question.
Thank you. Mr Morrison announced all aged care workers would have at least 1 COVID dose by 17 September. But today, New South Wales Health Minister Brad Hazzard said he is, quote, "not at all confident that will happen." Will the Morrison-Joyce government ensure all aged care workers receive a vaccine by 17 September to protect them and the people in their care?
Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. And I don't agree with Minister Hazzard with respect to his perspective on the vaccination of the aged care workforce. As of yesterday, there were about 58,000 aged care workers in Australia yet to be vaccinated. Last week, Mr President, we vaccinated over 22,000 of them. We've been vaccinating about 20-odd thousand a week. We offered last week 35,000 opportunities. We'll offer this week 28,000 opportunities for aged care workers through our range of programs, specific aged care opportunities for vaccination, Mr President. So we're working extremely hard with the providers, with the union movement, in fact, Mr President, who my department meet with twice a week. I meet with every Friday to discuss the rollout and the issues relating to the aged care workforce rollout. So we are determined, Mr President, to get the aged care workforce vaccinated. We are at—
Order. Senator Colbeck. Senator Keneally, a final supplementary question.
When Mr Morrison's own New South Wales Liberal and National colleagues have today continued to lay the blame for the bungled vaccine rollout squarely at his feet, how can Australians languishing in lockdown possibly believe Mr Morrison when he says he's fixed the failures of his bungled vaccine rollout?
Senator Colbeck.
Well, Mr President, I simply don't accept the characterisation that Senator Keneally has put on her question, Mr President. We are currently running vaccination rates on a per capita basis that are as good or better than any place in the world, the UK, the US, Mr President. So, yes, we did have some problems with the vaccination rollout early. We've acknowledged that, Mr President. We have been straight with the Australian people. We haven't been trying to undermine public confidence in the vaccine rollout like Labor have. We've continued to work, Mr President. We have continued to work to support supply of vaccine for the Australian people, Mr President. We've done deals where we could to gain access to additional capacity, and we've provided that information to the Australian people. And Mr President, it's clear to the Australian people, even if it's not clear to the Australian Labor Party. Vaccination is important. Take the opportunity to go and get a vaccine. The best vaccine is the one that's available to you right now.
Order. Order. Senator Dean Smith.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Payne. Can the minister update the Senate on the ways in which our diplomatic capability is delivering to protect Australians?
The Minister for Foreign Affairs, Senator Payne.
Thank you, Mr President, and I thank Senator Smith very much for the question. Mr President, as announced today by the Prime Minister, particularly in relation to Singapore, through our diplomatic channels with Singapore and previously with Poland, the government has been able to secure access to 1.5 million vaccine doses this month. Earlier today, the Prime Minister, the Health Minister and I announced that Australia will receive 500,000 doses of the Pfizer vaccine from Singapore under a dose-sharing arrangement. We will in turn deliver 500,000 Pfizer doses to Singapore in December when those supplies are available. It is a constructive and flexible way for governments to work together in all of our interests to manage COVID-19. And I particularly want to thank Prime Minister Lee, Foreign Minister Vivian Balakrishnan and the people of Singapore, and acknowledge the work of Australia's High Commissioner Will Hodgman and his team, who have worked closely with the Government of Singapore to achieve this outcome. Mr President, earlier this month we announced our agreement to receive 1 million Pfizer vaccines from Poland. These additional doses came on top of the 40 million Pfizer doses that Australia has secured for 2021, and that does provide a boost to the vaccine rollout across the country. It does also demonstrate the value of Australia's close engagement with other governments, and it's a strong example of countries cooperating and supporting one another as we face the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic together and across the Indo-Pacific in particular. It also reinforces the role that my department, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, plays in supporting Australia's response to and recovery from COVID-19. We are cooperating with our partners in the region, Mr President, cooperating to save lives, to advance economic recovery and to build health systems to protect against future pandemics.
Senator Smith, supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Can the minister outline the work we are doing to support vaccine access and COVID-19 support in the Pacific and in Southeast Asia?
Senator Payne.
Thanks very much, Mr President. And again, I thank Senator Smith for his question. At the G7 in June, Prime Minister Morrison committed to the delivery of at least 20 million vaccine doses from Australia's domestic supply to our region by mid-2022. We have already delivered over 2.1 million vaccine doses to the Pacific and Southeast Asia, as well as that vital end-to-end support for those doses to be administered where they are needed most. The delivery of 403,000 doses to Vietnam last week was the first of a number to our Southeast Asian partners. We've also committed 2.5 million doses to our partners in Indonesia, and we'll begin delivery of those soon. We're working in partnership with our neighbours to support comprehensive vaccination of the Pacific and Timor-Leste, Mr President. At this point in time, we've delivered 861,000 vaccine doses to Fiji, 577,850 to Timor-Leste. As I said, 403,000 to Vietnam, and further doses, of course, to Papua New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, Samoa, Tonga, Tuvalu, Vanuatu.
Has expired. Senator Smith, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Can the minister advise the Senate of our cooperation with international partners in support of vaccine access across our region?
Senator Payne.
Thank you, Mr President. We are working closely with international partners to support the region's response and recovery to the COVID-19 pandemic and to ensure access to COVID-19 vaccines for our partners. The impacts of COVID-19 continue to be very significant. The damage to economies and to communities in our region is severe. We've committed $130 million to the COVAX AMC, which has been delivering vaccines to the region since February. Our neighbours in Southeast Asia and the Pacific have now received more than 48 million COVAX doses, with more deliveries planned. And in addition, Australia has contributed $100 million to the Quad Vaccine Partnership. That's directed to vaccine procurement for the region and support for national vaccine rollouts. We are working with our partners to support these countries within their national plans on their priorities and delivering in those partnerships in that manner.
Senator Sheldon.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Health, Senator Colbeck. Today, 1,164 new local COVID-19 cases have been recorded in New South Wales, with 143 people currently in an ICU and, tragically, 96 total deaths during the current outbreak. An experienced respiratory physician at a Western Sydney hospital has described the COVID-19 crisis in Western Sydney in the following words, and I quote, "Imagine if during last year's bushfires, brigade captains were not informed where fires were moving and what resources might be required. This is exactly what is happening now. Spot fires have turned into roaring blazes of the virus. Is he right?"
Sorry, could you say the last phrase again, Senator Sheldon, after the quotation? We didn't quite hear.
Is he right?
Thank you, Senator Sheldon. Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think it's disappointing that Senator Sheldon would seek to make such a direct comparison between the circumstances of the very tragic bushfires last year and the circumstances of the pandemic right now, Mr. President. Clearly in New South Wales, the situation is extremely difficult. The New South Wales government has placed significant lockdowns on large proportions of the New South Wales community, Mr. President, and of course across all of New South Wales in an attempt to manage the current outbreak and suppress the spread of the virus, Mr. President. And suppression of the spread of the virus has been part of the national strategy on COVID-19 right since the outset of the pandemic in 2020, Mr. President. We value the contributions of all medical providers in relation to the management of the outbreak, and at all times, Mr. President, both at a state level and at a national level, we have relied significantly on the medical advice from our health professionals at a national level in guiding in establishing the national plan for COVID-19, and we know that in the states and territories, the chief health officers have played an absolutely pivotal role in the management and the advice to the states and territories with respect to the management of the virus. And I am certain that they will continue to do that. They provide very valuable information and advice with respect to the management of the pandemic, Mr. President, and of course through National Cabinet the states and the territories are working together with respect to the management of the virus and the pandemic across the country, Mr. President, and we'll continue to do that. Take the advice that's being provided to us by the professionals that are leading the pandemic and continue to work with them on managing the particular outbreaks in all of the jurisdictions.
Senator Colbeck. Senator Sheldon, a supplementary question.
It has been reported that the Morrison-Joyce government is only now seeking urgent advice from intensive care doctors about the pressure on hospital wards. Despite being more than 18 months into the pandemic, why has the Morrison-Joyce government waited for a looming crisis to seek advice?
Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. I completely reject the insinuation of Senator Sheldon, Mr. President. In fact, in March last year, Mr. President, we established a national agreement with the private hospital sector that provided us with the capacity to supplement public health capacity across the country. And, Mr. President, and as the circumstances of each of the outbreaks have come into place, those measures have been put into place, Mr. President. They were in Victoria last year, Mr. President, and they can be and they will be in New South Wales, Mr. President. So one of the very first things, Mr President, one of the very first things that this government did was to ensure the hospital capacity available to treat Australians who were suffering with COVID-19, Mr President. So for Labor to be just coming on board now, it's a bit late to come to the game, Mr President.
Order. Senator Sheldon, a final supplementary question.
The Western Sydney doctor also warned, and I quote, "With the coming deluge of cases, it is possible ambulances will not reach people suffering from heart attacks or strokes as quickly as they should. Can the minister guarantee that ambulances across Australia will be properly resourced to cope with the increased demand of high COVID-19 case numbers in the coming months?"
Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. Can I at first pay tribute to all of those paramedics, ambulance workers across the country who are doing such a great job. And I'm happy to concede, Mr President, at the current time, particularly in New South Wales, under severe pressure, because there is a significant transmission of COVID-19 in the community at the moment, Mr President, and I know that they are working very hard and very diligently to meet the demand, Mr President. So we have put additional resources, significant additional resources, into the national health system across the country, particularly focused on COVID-19. In fact, on the 13th of March last year, 13th of March 2020, the Australian government and all state and territory governments signed a national partnership to respond to the virus, Mr President. So we have been working on this and ensuring the capacity was there for a long time, Mr President.
Order. Order. Senator Thorpe, remotely.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is for the Minister representing the Prime Minister. A First Nations man died because of COVID-19 this week. Our communities are not getting the help they so urgently need as COVID rips through our communities. Will Kanya Mob ask for urgent help over a year ago? Why did you neglect our people and our calls for support?
Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. I thank Senator Thorpe for her question and acknowledge that every loss of life through this pandemic is a tragic one. It's tragic around the world, where, Mr President, we've seen more than 4.5 million deaths across the globe. And of course, it's tragic in Australia, where some 1,006 deaths have occurred. And whilst the death rate in Australia has been far, far lower than around the world, we acknowledge the personal pain and anguish of those individuals. If we compare the situation through Australia during this pandemic, in Victoria last year, when we didn't have the targeted aspects of the vaccine rollout in place, there was a fatality rate of around 4.2%. This year, during the outbreak that's occurring in New South Wales, that fatality rate has dropped by close to 90% and down to 0.45%. That's a large factor due to the heavy focus on ensuring that older Australians were vaccinated first and foremost, and in doing so, helping to make sure that we reduce the fatality rate in those most vulnerable populations of all older Australians. I acknowledge that we do have particular challenges in Western New South Wales and around the Wilcannia region, as Senator Thorpe.
Can I point of order?
No, sorry, Senator Thorpe. The remote participation rules don't allow for points of order when participating remotely.
Well, how can I get the question out?
You've got to someone in the chamber can raise something, or you've got supplementary questions. My apologies, but they are the rules the Senate adopted. Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr President. So in relation to those around Western New South Wales, in particular the Wilcannia region, we've been working closely with state and territory governments and Aboriginal controlled community health services to ensure the needs of Indigenous community planning and delivery, including through this outbreak of COVID, and particularly as it relates to working through the vaccination program. Indeed, Mr President, we know that there are particular challenges in there, and it is in response to those challenges that we have ensured additional resources have been provided to Wilcannia to help to support that community and those across Western New South Wales. The Commonwealth Department of Health stood up an incident management team to coordinate the Commonwealth response.
Order. Senator
including
Birmingham,
representatives
time for the
of
answer
MHLA.
has expired. Senator Thorpe, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. President. The gap between First Nations vaccination rates and non-Indigenous rates is as high as 17 percentage points in some states. When will all First Nations people be vaccinated?
Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr. President. I continue to urge and encourage all Australians, including Indigenous Australians, Torres Strait Islanders, indeed all parts of our population, to respond and to seize the earliest opportunities to be vaccinated. And we're seeing amazing growth in Australia in the vaccine program, and that growth indeed has seen from 4 weeks ago, when 42% of the population had had a first dose, to now nearly 59% of the Australian population having had
on
a
a
first
point of order.
dose.
Sorry, Senator Birmingham. I have Senator Hanson-Young on a point of order. Senator Hanson-Young.
On a point of order, Senator Thorpe asked specifically about Indigenous peoples, and I'd like the minister to answer that question. When would they be vaccinated?
Senator, there was a statistic asserted. Senator Hanson-Young, there was a statistic asserted as a preamble to that. I believe the minister is being directly relevant to that with this part of the answer. I'll continue to listen carefully, but I can't instruct him how to answer the question. Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr. President. We have more than 9,000 access points for people to get a vaccine across Australia now. That is only going to grow. We are working across particularly Western and Far Western New South Wales with the Royal Flying Doctor Service, with other vaccine providers, with primary healthcare networks and Aboriginal community-controlled health services to make sure that we have even more points of access for individuals, as we're doing across Indigenous communities right around the country. The message must be clear to take advantage of these opportunities to help
Senator
drive
Birmingham, time for the
vaccination
answer
rates
has
even
expired. Senator Thorpe, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for your non-answer, Minister. People are dying out there and you did not answer my question. Our communities and our people warned this government about housing, safe decarceration and self-determined health service a year ago. How much blame do you accept for completely failing Aboriginal people in this country without the excuses?
Senator
Do your job.
Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Mr. President. Mr. President, I don't accept the characterisation by Senator Thorpe in her answer. This is a challenging global pandemic. As I said in response to the primary question, more than 4.5 million people around the world have lost their lives. And we've sought to provide the best protections possible for Australians from the outset and through the closure of Australia's international borders, through the scaling up of a range of different health responses across the country, working closely with those state and territory partners, and now at this stage through the vaccine rollout.
I'm sorry, this is wrong.
Order. Senator Thorpe, please. Senator Birmingham to continue. We lost Senator Birmingham.
Somebody, do I have any
So
friends
order.
in there?
Senator Thorpe, order, please.
Do Black Lives...
Senator Thorpe, I can ask for your microphone to be muted if you keep interjecting. Senator Birmingham to continue.
Thanks, Mr. President. Mr. President, nobody pretends these issues are easy or have easy responses, but indeed ensuring the additional
Senator
vaccine
Siewert, on a
clinics...
point of order.
So I do have a point of order. The minister isn't answering the question was, how much do you accept blame for the failure to vaccinate First Nations?
Senator Siewert, resume your seat. I have asserted repeatedly that I'm not going to allow points of order on direct relevance for people to simply stand up and ask the question again, or as in this case, part of the question again. There was not even an attempt to make a point of order about direct relevance, Senator Siewert. There was a lot in the question asked by Senator Thorpe, and the minister is entitled to respond to any or all parts of it in the time allotted.
That part of the question.
Senator Siewert, I have said before that I can't instruct a minister which part of a question to answer, which assertion to address, or how to answer a question. If there are long questions with a lot of content in them, the minister is entitled to address any or all parts of it in the minute he has allowed in this case. I've ruled repeatedly that tight questions will have a very tight test of direct relevance. Senator Birmingham.
Thank you, Mr. President. As I've said in the chamber many times, we accept responsibility for the challenges the vaccine rollout's faced and for fixing it. And indeed, we accept responsibility for dealing with all of the different challenges we've faced during COVID-19, because that's the job we have to get on and do. And it's why we've put the RFDS in place with additional vaccine capacity.
Order.
While we're working
Senator
with
Birmingham, time for the answer has expired. Senator Brockman.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Health and Aged Care, Senator Colbeck. Can the Minister update the Senate on Australia's COVID-19 vaccine rollout as part of the national plan agreed by National Cabinet, particularly in relation to older Australians?
The Minister representing the Minister for Health and Aged Care, Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thanks, Senator Brockman, for your question. Mr. President, Australia's COVID-19 vaccine rollout continues to ramp up as we said it would. More than 19.3 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines have now been administered in Australia, Mr. President. Over the weekend, around 380,000 people rolled up their sleeves and got a jab to protect themselves, their friends, Mr. President, their families, and to protect their country. Yesterday, a further 277,000 doses went into arms of Australians, Mr. President, and I thank every single one of those people for going out and getting vaccinated, and encourage all Australians to do the same. While your home state of Western Australia, Senator Brockman, has very low COVID infections, the vaccine rollout is forging ahead in Western Australia too, so that when the time comes, WA can join all the states
Senator Watt.
and reopen to the rest of the country and to the world, which is going to be very important for us all, Mr. President. We've got on with the job of protecting our most vulnerable Australians. That's our older citizens first. More than 87% of over 70s are protected with the first dose. We have done this because we know that elimination of the virus is a fallacy, and vaccines are the answer to us living with the virus, not in fear of it. We have a national plan that states and territories have agreed on to open up at 70% and 80% vaccination rates progressively. If we don't stick to the plan, the cost in terms of lives and livelihoods, as we're hearing right now, will be unacceptably high. Jobs will be lost, businesses will close. I'm pleased that you think that's funny, Senator. I really do. I think that's outrageous. The debt burden will rise and the well-being of Australians will suffer. Vaccines, Mr. President, are the path to safety and living with the virus into the future.
Order. Order on my left. Order. Senator McAllister. Senator McAllister. Senator Watt. Senator Brockman, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do have a supplementary question. How is the Liberal and National Government strengthening the skilled workforce in aged care to help protect older Australians through and beyond?
Senator Brock, I have repeatedly asked for silence during questions. If the opposition expects the courtesy, it should give the same to the government and vice versa. Senator Brockman, you can start the question again. I couldn't hear it.
Obviously touched a sore point over there, Mr. President.
Just to the question, Senator Brockman.
How is the Liberal and Nationals government strengthening the skilled workforce in aged care to help protect older Australians through and beyond the COVID-19 pandemic?
Good question.
Senator Colbeck. Senator Watt, take a breath. Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm pleased to report that the vaccination rate of our workforce who care for our most vulnerable Australians is climbing each and every day. And 78% of the aged care workforce in residential care have had at least one dose of the vaccine. National Cabinet agreed that the COVID-19 vaccination of residential workers will become mandatory by mid-September. The Department of Health has been working with each residential aged care facility to ensure they have plans in place and provide support where needed to ensure every residential aged care worker has access to COVID-19 vaccination, Mr. President. There are a number of channels open to them to get vaccinated, including the government's in-reach services, vaccination of their own staff and using the Commonwealth and state vaccination clinics, GPs and around 3,000 pharmacies across the country, Mr. President. We are determined to get this done.
Senator Brockman, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. What other measures, including rapid antigen testing, is the government introducing to further protect communities across Australia?
Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President, and a very important question. Mr President, the Australian government is making rapid antigen testing kits available to residential aged care, home care services delivered through the Commonwealth Home and services delivered through the Commonwealth Home Support Program in high-risk local government areas of concern across Sydney and Western New South Wales. Rapid antigen testing, Mr President, is not an alternative to vaccination, but it does provide an extra layer of defence in that it helps to detect COVID-19 in people without any symptoms of COVID-19. Applications are open and remain open, Mr President, to receive rapid antigen test kits. To date, orders have been dispatched to 128 sites in Sydney and New South Wales. Kits will be distributed under the National Medical Stockpile Arrangements. Mr President, the TGA has published guidance, including a checklist to help businesses with the implementation of COVID-19 rapid antigen point-of-care testing in their workforce.
Order. Senator O'Neill.
Thank you very much, Mr President. And my question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Health, Senator Colbeck. Today there are close to 70 COVID-19 cases in Wilcannia, and tragically it was reported yesterday that a First Nations man died from COVID-19 in Dubbo. New South Wales Deputy Premier, Nationals MP John Barilaro has said today, and I quote, "We know that the federal government's vaccination program at the start of the year identified Indigenous communities as part of the 1A rollout, and it hadn't occurred. And that's something that they lost attention of. And we know earlier in the year the rollout wasn't anywhere where it needed to be. Why did the Morrison-Joyce government lose attention and fail to ensure these communities were vaccinated as planned many months ago?"
Minister representing the Minister for Health and Aged Care, Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. And can I say we all join with others in the chamber in respect of the unfortunate passing of the Indigenous person in Wilcannia.
Order.
Mr President, but can I say Senator is completely incorrect with respect to characterisation of the work that's been done in that community.
Order.
And
Senator Watt. Oh, sorry, Senator O'Neill. I hope it's a point of order and not attempt to restate the question.
Your wish is my command, Mr President.
Thank you.
So can I just say that, no, I don't want to restate the question, but the Minister has the point of order is really that he worked outside the standing orders in terms of attributing to me a quote that was
Senator
Minister Barilaro.
Senator O'Neill, there was no breach of the standing orders. There's a time to debate the answer to questions after question time, where people's satisfaction or otherwise with answers can be attended to then. Senator Colbeck to continue.
Thank you, Mr President. Mr President, the government, Commonwealth Government, through a GP respiratory-led clinic, has had a presence through Marymar in Wilcannia since May of 2020. Since May of 2020, Mr President. Marymar transitioned to become a Commonwealth vaccination clinic, Mr President, on the 22nd of March this year, so very early in the vaccine rollout. It transitioned into a vaccination clinic on the 22nd of March, offering AstraZeneca vaccine, and then started administering Pfizer vaccine on the 11th of June, Mr President, so well before this outbreak occurred, Mr President. Well, Senator, if you are talking down AstraZeneca, Senator, you ought to be ashamed of yourself, Senator. If you are talking down AstraZeneca, which is what you're doing by your statement, Senator, you ought to be ashamed of yourself, Mr President, because the medical advice, Mr President, the medical advice is that the best vaccine for you is the one that you can get today, Mr President, and that vaccine's been available in this community, Mr President, since March of this year. Since March of this year, in line with our commitment to prioritise Indigenous communities, Mr President. So if the good senator wants to continue to downplay
Order, Senator
or
Colbeck, time for the answer has expired. Order. At least while I'm calling the chamber to order, can a little respect for the rules be shown? Senator O'Neill, a supplementary question. Senator Keneally. Senator O'Neill, a supplementary question.
Mr Barilaro, and it is Mr Barilaro who said, and I quote, "Should they have been vaccinated earlier? Yes. It was all part of the federal government's rollout of the vaccination program at the start of the year, and it didn't occur." Why didn't this occur?
Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, as I've just indicated,
Order.
Mr. Barilaro in that context is completely wrong, because there was an AstraZeneca clinic out.
Senator Watt.
In Wilcannia, Mr. President, out in Wilcannia from the 22nd
Senator
of
Colbeck,
March this
please
year.
resume your seat. I'm going to insist that when I call individual senators to order, they stay silent for a little while, because I can't hear the answer. And I have numerous complaints from those attending remotely that with the volume in the chamber, they can't hear the answer. Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. AstraZeneca was available in that community from the 22nd of March this year, in line with our commitment under the national plan. Pfizer was available in that community from the 11th of June this year, Mr. President. So the vaccines have been available in those communities, Mr. President. As we said we would do, and we continue to ramp up the vaccination rollout, Mr. President, and as the circumstances in those communities have changed, Mr. President, we have added additional support. We have the Royal Flying Doctor Service out there working with us. We have the Defence Force working out there providing additional vaccination clinics, Mr. President. So we have continued to support those communities, and we will continue to do so.
Order. Senator O'Neill, a final supplementary question.
Tragically, it was reported yesterday that a man in Dubbo was the first Indigenous person to die from COVID in Australia. Health authorities said he wasn't vaccinated. He should have been vaccinated months ago. How has the Morrison-Joyce government failed so badly to protect vulnerable First Nation people from COVID?
Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr. President. And as Senator Birmingham indicated earlier in the day, the vaccination rates have acknowledged that the vaccination rates need to increase, Mr. President. As of today, 216,724 Indigenous peoples, or 30%, 37% have had their first dose. 20.5%, or 118,886, have had their second, Mr. President. The numbers aren't high enough. We need to continue to work on this, and we've done that through a number of programs, Mr. President. We have sought out influencers to support vaccination into those communities. Unfortunately, Mr. President, there have been some very unfortunate but influential voices who have been anti-vaccine in some of those communities. We have to turn those attitudes around, and we will continue to do that in support of getting particularly Indigenous Australians vaccinated, but all vaccinations, because we know that that's our path through the pandemic.
Senator Chandler.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is to the Minister for Women's Safety, Senator Ruston. Can the minister update the Senate on the National Summit on Women's Safety and how the summit will be delivered in light of the current COVID-19 restrictions?
The Minister for Women's Safety, Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank Senator Chandler for her question. Well, the National Summit on Women's Safety is an absolutely critical step in the development of the next national plan to end violence against women and their children. It will be an ambitious blueprint to stop the scourge that is family, domestic and sexual violence in Australia. The plan will respond to urgent new issues that we are facing today and build a base for emerging and evolving issues into the future. I'm pleased to advise the Senate that the summit will be held next Monday and Tuesday, the 6th and 7th of September, in virtual format. Through an online platform, it will bring together experts, survivors, advocates and service providers from locations all around Australia. Panels and presentations will be live-streamed to enable Australians to engage in this very important milestone in our work towards developing the next national plan. The summit will cover a very, very broad range of issues, including things such as economic security and financial independence, e-safety, perpetrator interventions and responding to sexual violence, to name but a few. It's the culmination of extensive consultations and will allow a diverse range of delegates to build a foundation in shaping our next national plan. Importantly, the summit is an opportunity to put a spotlight on our shared commitment to create a future where women and children live free from violence. We are absolutely committed to work towards a Towards Zero target to ensure all Australians are safe in their home, at work and safe in our communities. The live stream will be available to watch on the 6th and 7th of September via womensafetysummit.com.au. I encourage absolutely everybody who wants to have their say on the next national plan to engage with this very, very important milestone.
Senator Chandler, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Minister, how will you be engaging with people across the sector throughout the summit?
Senator Ruston.
Thank you very much, Mr President. Well, hearing from the diverse groups in our community is absolutely crucial to ensure our next national plan is the best possible plan it can be. And that's why our consultation process is extensive and involves hearing from victim survivors, from advocates, service providers and other experts in this field. For maximum reach, we are using a range of medium, including public survey, the recent parliamentary inquiry, targeted workshops and interviews with key stakeholders through the up-and-coming National Summit for Women's Safety. Through the summit, panels are being held to bring together a cross-section of views from survivors, the service sector, academics and other experts to discuss existing issues and to delve into the new and emerging issues that we are already starting to see. So, to ensure that all Australians are able to contribute to this important national conversation, consultations have been extended through a new survey available to all members of the public and will be available on DSS Engage until the 15th of September.
Chandler, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. How else is the Liberal and Nationals government continuing to work towards the commitment to end violence against women and their children in the transition to the next national plan to reduce violence against women and their children?
Senator Ruston.
Well, this week I announced that we're committing $4.2 million to a new domestic violence deterrence program as part of our commitment to end violence against women and their children, which is part of the government's $1.1 billion women's safety package. Early interventions are absolutely essential if we are to reduce violence, and that's why perpetrator programs are such an important part of our response. It is absolutely unacceptable that in Australia around 50% of perpetrators will commit a further domestic violence offence within 4 years of their initial offence. The Coordinated Enforcement and Support to Eliminate Domestic Violence program aims to deter perpetrators from reoffending through overt monitoring and clear consequences for repeat offending behaviours. The program will be delivered by the Australian Institute of Criminology, working in close contact with the state and territory police forces. This program has been highly successful in the US by holding offenders to account for their behaviour.
Senator Lambie.
Thank you, Mr President. My question is for the Minister representing the Minister for Health and Aged Care, Senator Colbeck. Senator, rapid antigen testing kits for COVID-19 are going to be effective.
Senator Lambie, I'll let you start the clock again, but you just dropped out a bit after I got the direction to Senator Colbeck. Could you start the question again, please?
Okay, Mr President, can you hear me?
Yes, we can now.
Thank you. Senator Colbeck, rapid antigen testing kits for COVID-19 are going to be a fact of life for many of us in the next stage of this pandemic. From Monday, unvaccinated people in Sydney will need to take them before they can go to work. I reckon a lot of us will be going the same way eventually. The tests aren't as accurate as lab tests, but they give you a quick answer in 20 minutes, and they're just a swab up the nose. Easy enough to do on your own. Senator, does your government understand how important rapid tests will be for us in the next few months?
The Minister representing the Minister for Health and Aged Care, Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. Thanks, Senator Lambie, for the question. I think it's an important one. Mr President, there are, I think, over 20 different types of rapid antigen tests that are approved for use in Australia through the Therapeutic Goods Administration. And I know that a lot of businesses are already looking at their utilisation as a part of the way that they manage and protect themselves and their workforce from COVID-19 as we go forward. As you might have heard, earlier in question time today, I indicated that we have commenced a process of rolling out rapid antigen tests from the national stockpile to aged care providers in metropolitan Sydney and also in regional areas of New South Wales where COVID is a concern, because it is a simple way to get some indication in short time frame of whether or not there is a worker who might have an infection of COVID-19, Mr President. Senator Lambie, you're right when you mentioned in your question that they don't have the same efficacy as one of the standard tests that's being used, the PCR test that's being utilised more broadly across the community, but I think they can and will play a role in the management of COVID-19. That's why we're rolling them out through residential aged care, because you can get an indication of somebody who might be carrying the virus before they go to work, and that's why business and industry are utilising them already, Mr President. And so even someone who's vaccinated can be transmitting the virus and carrying the virus, and so these provide an additional layer of protection to us all as part of our management of COVID-19. So as I said, there are over 20 different types of rapid antigen tests that are currently approved
Senator Colbeck,
with very good
time
guidelines
for the
on the
answer
TGA
has
website.
Expired. Senator Lambie, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Senator, in the United Kingdom, you can pick up a rapid test for free from any pharmacy. You can take it home and get an answer in 20 minutes. But for some reason in Australia, we can only do the test if we're supervised by a trained health official, and we have to pay for it ourselves. Is there a reason that the Coalition doesn't trust Australians to chuck a swab up our nose?
Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. And again, it's an important question, because one of the things that's a very important part of our overall management of COVID-19 is our test, track and trace capabilities. Our test, track and trace capabilities, Mr President. We saw that in Victoria last year, how important it was. We see what's happening in other jurisdictions around the country now, where significant effort is being undertaken by states and territories across the country in their testing regimes, their tracking and tracing and then isolation of the virus. So they all play a very important part in that process. You made the point yourself, Senator Lambie, when you talked about the fact that these tests aren't as accurate as the PCR test that we're using in that broader process. So we support the use of these tests under the conditions of approval by the Therapeutic Goods Administration, Mr President, supported by the backup of a PCR test if there's an indicator, Mr President, which is very important.
Order. Senator Lambie, a final supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. Senator, you and I know that I don't always agree with big business lobbyists, but today Innes Willicks, the head of the Australian Industry Group, called on the government to pay for rapid tests when their government mandated, like in New South Wales. He says that forcing employers to pay for tests so they can get their workers on site is putting a tax on jobs. I reckon he's right. Why are we so far behind once again, and when will free rapid tests be available for every worker who needs one?
Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. Thanks, Senator Lambie. And in high-risk occupations, Mr President, in high-risk areas, we're actually doing that. As I've indicated, we are supporting residential aged care providers in New South Wales with the provision of rapid antigen tests into those facilities, and over 120 facilities have already received tests and have started the process, Mr President. So in the circumstances where it is warranted, Mr President, we're already providing that level of support, which I think is important, and will continue to do that. An extra layer of protection for those businesses where we're looking after our most vulnerable, Mr President. I saw in Tokyo over 600,000 tests of rapid antigen type applied through the Olympic Games to support the running of the Tokyo 2020 Olympics, Mr President. So they can form an important part of the overall management and testing regime that occurs in the country, Mr President, but they need to be supported by the efficacy of a PCR test.
Order. Senator McCarthy. Sorry, we're not hearing you, Senator McCarthy. I know I've got a reserve here for you. I'll give you another chance.
Yes, thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Health, Senator Colbeck. I refer to reports a First Nations woman was turned away with COVID-19 with breathing difficulties from Wilcannia Medical Service last week. Barkindji woman Monica Kerwin-Wyman said the woman was left outside like a dog and has pleaded, and I quote, "Somebody, anybody, get this out there. This is what's going on in Wilcannia and I'm crying, I'm tired and nobody's helping us." Minister, why has the Morrison government abandoned First Nations people in Wilcannia?
The Minister representing the Minister for Health and Aged Care, Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. Mr President, I would be very concerned if any person, any Australian was turned away from a health service when they were in need. That should not be occurring. Simply should not happen, Mr President. I don't accept Senator McCarthy's characterisation that we have in any way abandoned Indigenous Australians, Mr President. We established very early on in the pandemic, in fact in March, beginning of March last year, a national strategy, an advisory group on COVID-19 back on the 5th of March in 2020, Mr President. There was a national Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander management plan for novel coronavirus approved on the 26th of March last year, Mr President, and the implementation of that plan for the vaccine program and Torres Strait Islander people was finalised on the 9th of March this year, Mr President. So we have prioritised Indigenous Australians as a part of the program. We have supplied vaccines, as I have already indicated, to the chamber today, Mr President. The circumstances of the Indigenous woman that's been described by Senator McCarthy should not have happened. Australians should be able to access health services. They should be able to access health services when they need them, Mr President. Mr President, we will continue the work that we are doing with the RFDS, the Defence Force, the ACHOs, all the Indigenous health services around the country who are supporting their own people in managing the pandemic, whether it be through providing vaccines, as many of them are doing, Mr President, or providing health services, and we will continue to support them in doing that.
Senator McCarthy, a supplementary question.
The CEO of the Northern Territory Aboriginal Medical Services, John Patterson, has warned, and I quote, "The targets suggested of 70 or 80% vaccination are totally fraudulent if applied to remote Australia. They would totally fail our people." How many First Nations Australians, Minister, will be fully vaccinated when Australia reaches the 70 and 80% targets for Australians aged over 16?
Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. Well, I would hope that the Indigenous vaccination rate, is lifted to at least match, but if not better, the vaccination rate for the rest of the population, Mr President. That's what we would like to see, Mr President. I have acknowledged here today, Mr President, I have already acknowledged here in the chamber today that the vaccination numbers are not high enough. We need to continue to work to lift those numbers, working with the Indigenous communities, with the First Nations people, with influencers of those First Nations people to encourage Indigenous Australians to take up a vaccine, Mr President.
Senator Colbeck. I have Senator Keneally on a point of order. Senator Keneally.
It is a point of relevance. It was a very tightly worded question. How many First Nations Australians will be fully vaccinated when we hit 70–80%? I invite the Minister to either answer it or take it on notice.
You are going beyond the issue of direct relevance and asking me to instruct a minister how to answer a question. When he's talking about this subject material, he is being very directly relevant to a very specific question. Senator Colbeck to continue.
And Mr President, I have actually addressed specifically the matter of the question, Mr President. And so Senator Keneally might like to just interrupt question time as many times as you possibly can, Mr President. And our objective is to have vaccination rates equally high across the country, across all communities, because it's important and it's our path through the pandemic.
Senator McCarthy, a final supplementary question.
Ms Kerwin-Wyman also warned, and I quote, "They don't have a COVID plan here, they don't have ventilators, they don't have anything, and I think they've just got body bags." Minister, given Mr Morrison has failed to deliver on his promise to vaccinate 1B priority groups by winter, does the Morrison-Joyce government regret Mr Morrison declaring the vaccine rollout is not a race?
Senator Colbeck.
Thank you, Mr President. I think the statement made by that community representative is a very unfortunate one, because very early in the pandemic, the thing that this government did and the work that we did, particularly with the states and territories, and can I say I commend the work of the Northern Territory Government and the relationship that we have with the Northern Territory Government in relation to providing health services out through to communities, Mr President, and across the country, Mr President, is extremely important. And we have provided significant assets and resources, including ventilators, to ensure that they were available in the circumstance that they were needed. In fact, we were able to gather so many ventilators that we've actually been able to provide them to some of our regional neighbours who didn't have them, Mr President. So I reject the premise that we haven't worked to put the systems in place and the relationships in place to support Australians through the health system.
Senator Small.
Thanks, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Superannuation, Financial Services and the Digital Economy, Senator Hume. Unlike the Labor Party, which included a retiree tax in its policy platform taken to the last election as just one part of $387 billion in taxes, can the minister advise the Senate on the headline results from APRA's release today of the very first annual superannuation fund performance test, and how this forms just part of the Morrison government's plan to not only protect but to enhance the Australians' retirement incomes into the future?
Senator Keneally and Watt, during the question, please. The Minister for Superannuation, Financial Services and the Digital Economy, Senator Hume.
Thank you very much, Mr President, and I thank Senator Small for his question, and a very important question it is too. In fact, it's a very important day today for all superannuation members out there and Australia's future retirees, because today the outcomes of the first annual performance test for MySuper products has been published on the Your Super comparison tool on the ATO's website. Now, this performance test reveals that $56.2 billion of Australians' retirement funds is in fact invested in underperforming products, and these products are held in almost 1.1 million separate accounts. The test assessed the performance of over 80 MySuper products and found that 13 of these products have underperformed, and as we predicted, it is a mixture of retail, industry and corporate funds that have underperformed. Mr President, the Morrison government is hauling performance out of the darkness and into the light, into the bright sunlight of accountability, and it will be very uncomfortable for some of those funds, but it is so important, and let me explain to you why. Because, Mr President, the Australian superannuation industry has now reached the dizzying heights of $3.3 trillion. Now that, to put it into context, is bigger than GDP.
Order.
It is bigger than the ASX, and it has
Senator
doubled.
Watt.
It has doubled in size since the coalition came to government.
Senator Watt.
Reports of superannuation's death have been greatly exaggerated by those opposite. Back when we came to government, we inherited a system that was riddled with flaws, that meant that super wasn't delivering on its promise to the 16 million Australian workers and retirees who rely upon it. Since then, the Morrison government has been chipping away at those inefficiencies. We're eliminating unintended multiple accounts that you allowed to proliferate. We're reuniting lost and inactive and low-balance accounts with their rightful owners. We've banned exit fees. We've capped fees on low balances. We've removed unnecessary insurance premiums, particularly for young people that did not need them. And we've empowered all Australians to choose their own funds, something you have denied them
Senator
for years
Hume.
and
Senator
years.
Small, a supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr President. I do have a supplementary question. in light of the fact that Australia's superannuation pool is now larger than GDP, arguably connecting Australians to their own money in superannuation has never been more important. So how can Australians access the Your Super comparison tool and take-up? And how has the take-up of the tool been since it was launched?
Senator Watt, I have repeatedly asked for silence during the question. Senator Hume.
Thank you, Mr President. Well, at present, Australian households pay around $30 billion a year in superannuation fees. Now, to put that into context, it's actually more than the $27 billion that households spend on energy bills and the $12 billion that they spend on water bills. It's now easier than ever for Australians to ensure that they are not being ripped off by their fund with the introduction of the Your Super comparison tool. Mr President, more than 375,000 Australians have in fact already accessed the Your Super comparison tool in just the 2 months since it was launched. And we know that many more Australians will now use that tool to compare their super fund after those performance results were released today. Finally, superannuation members can compare apples with apples. It's so simple to use. Just jump on your search engine and look up Super Comparison Tool. Click on the ATO website and you will, the next thing you know is you'll be comparing funds, and you can even personalise it. Your fund, your balance, through the ATO portal, through the MyGov website.
Hume,
it's never been easier.
Question answer has expired. Senator O'Neill. Senator Small, a final supplementary question.
Thanks, Mr President. Because the Morrison government stands for protecting, preserving and enhancing the retirement incomes of Australians, can the minister outline what the consequences will be for those funds that failed the performance test 2 years in a row, and what reactions has the government received from stakeholders in the super sector to these important performance measures?
Senator Hume.
Thank you again, Mr President. And this is an extraordinarily important question, because if your superannuation fund is failing, there are very serious consequences. Funds are now required to notify their members, to notify you of their underperformance on the 27th of September this year. Funds must provide members with details of the Your Super comparison tool, so that members can then consider whether a different product would better suit their needs. Mr President, the Australian Prudential Regulation Authority has now also written to superannuation funds whose products fail or marginally pass that performance test, setting out their supervisory expectations. And this will include APRA assessing the credibility of funds' plans to improve their performance and to lower their fees. Importantly, products that fail the annual performance test 2 years in a row will be closed to new members until their performance improves. That means they will not be allowed to take on new members who will suffer from their continual underperformance. APRA have made their position clear. Trustees of the 13 products that have failed the test now face an important choice.
Time for the answer has expired. Senator Cash.
Thank you, Mr President. I ask that further questions be now placed on notice.